Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord and Fox 5's Miles Garrett. Another 7-10 season, 3 in a row, and Arthur Smith is out as the Falcons head coach. Miles, you have been following this team as close as anybody. What do you think ultimately led to that decision?
Yeah, I mean, Chase, there were reports a few weeks back saying that, look, Arthur Smith will most likely be safe barring a late season collapse. What happened? You lose to the now 2-win Panthers, at the time 1-win Panthers, and then you get blown out by Chicago, and then you get blown out by your division rival. If that isn't the definition of a late season collapse, I don't really know what is. I think that if you win maybe 2 out of 3 of those games, maybe even 1 out of 3 of those games, Arthur Smith is still here, and we're talking about maybe a playoff game coming up this Sunday just because of the NFC South. But I really do think the way they lost and the teams they lost to was really the straw that broke the camel's back. And Arthur Blank knows, he hung around with Dan Quinn and Mike Smith maybe a season too long. I think he was really worried about doing that again, potentially with Arthur Smith. I know he likes Arthur Smith a lot. The players like Arthur Smith a lot. I think that's really important to note when talking about, losing the locker room and all that. I don't think Arthur Smith has lost the locker room by any means. All the players were very adamant about showing their support for him. But at the end of the day, you got to win. And Arthur didn't do enough to justify that.
Yeah, I think that was pretty notable that after the game, everybody, Calais Campbell, I think Tyler Algier, everybody was saying how much they loved playing for Arthur Smith. But again, results-oriented business. The guy didn't win. And I do want to preface my next question with, I really don't think there's a coach out there, maybe, Kyle Shanahan, that could have won with Atlanta's quarterback play. Like, it was absolutely horrid. And I think that Blank was looking for any reason to keep Arthur Smith around, and he just continued. Again, I don't want to put it all on Arthur Smith, because if you watched Falcons games this year, I mean, the quarterback play was bottom 5, bottom 3, worst in the NFL at times. So speak to that a little bit, and how, he put all of his eggs in a third-round picks basket.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it comes down to. You can chalk it up to quarterback play. I think there's at least 3 games that come to mind that you could chalk up quarterback play as being the reason that you lost the game. I mean, Carolina immediately comes to mind. It was low scoring, but you take away that last interception, the Falcons probably win it. The second loss to the Buccaneers. You got the Titans game. All those games you were in. I mean, basically almost all their losses outside of maybe 2 or 3 were within reach, and you have good quarterback play. And who's to say, you come out on top in those? So you understand that, yes, better quarterback play, you could be very well, not could be very well, almost certainly are a playoff team at this scenario. But like you said, the narrative changes when you tie yourself to that and you spend all offseason, an entire offseason, saying that Desmond is the guy. There's no quarterback competition. You're not bringing in anybody else to compete for that role. Granted, they did bring in Taylor Heineke, but they were very adamant that he was going to be the guy. Then you have another statement midway through the season when, you bench Desmond and put Taylor in, then you put Desmond back in. And when you do that, you say that we're not going to play musical chairs. He's our guy for the rest of the year. Then you do it again. So, I mean, like, it's you can't have those scenarios where you're basically contradicting yourself and going off on that. So I do think you're right when it comes to that. Yeah, you tied yourself to it. This is your job, and this was your decision ultimately. So I think that's what it came down to.
I think I referred to it as the most violent game of musical chairs.
I did see that tweet.
In musical chairs history, because he's like, yeah, we're not going to play musical chairs. And then it was literally like, like, yeah, just whip it out from under you. I want to ask you about the fan perspective and all this, because I don't think fans and what they say and, the aura around the team and stuff like that should have too much in the personnel decisions of the coaching staff and stuff like that. But there was I don't think I've ever seen so many Falcons fans actively root for the Saints. In fact, I don't think I've seen that many times ever. That was a clear thing. Like yesterday, I had more people in my mentions cheering for the Saints than I've ever seen in my life, and they were all Falcons fans, and vice versa. I think the Saints fans were cheering for the Falcons. They keep their head coach. That sucks for them. I mean, listen, I don't know if the Arthur Smith thing will end up being the right move. That's yet to be determined, but how much do you think the disconnect that Arthur Smith had with this fan base? Because I can't really remember. I mean, even when Dan Quinn was struggling, people wanted him fired, but everyone loved Dan Quinn, right? Like they thought he was a good person, a good guy. He was honest. He was honest to the media and stuff like that. Arthur Smith just kind of neglected all that. And there's no problem with that. You know, we've seen it with Belichick and no one cares. But now you're seeing it with Belichick. He's doing it while you're losing and people start to hate you. How much do you think that had an effect? And obviously, when you look at the stands every weekend, Arthur Blank has to be pissed off. I mean, you can't be happy with what you're seeing from a fan base perspective. How much do you think that impacted the decision?
Oh, I think it impacted it big time because, as you guys were saying, I think Arthur Blank was looking for reasons to keep Arthur Smith at the end of the day. And I think the last 2 weeks, he lost the fan base. I mean, I think that became very evident when you look at Twitter, when you look at just the fan base as a whole. When you lose the fan base like that, it's really hard to pitch the team going forward. And if you were to have retained Arthur Smith, it would have been really hard. It would have been a really hard sell, even with a new quarterback, just because you said this past offseason. You got all these new additions, you get all these new guys on offense like Bijan Robinson. Your bread and butter is your run game, and you don't see anything as a result. But I do think, as you were saying, that sort of that smugness, so to say, it didn't bode well with the fans and the media. Although I will say I do like Arthur Smith as a person, like off the record. I think he was a very good guy, and I think that what he does is more of like a protection for his players more of. And I do think that's where that connection kind of comes with his players and why they were so adamant about him and so bought into what he had to do, because he really is a player's coach. And I think that sort of smugness that comes across in the press conferences was more of a defense for his own players and kind of keeping things internal. So whereas, from a PR standpoint, it probably doesn't really bode over well. And it didn't, obviously, as you can just look on Twitter and newspapers, TV, whatever you want to do. Fans probably don't respond to that well, but the players definitely do. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's losing the fan base. And, when you lose the fan base, it's a business at the end of the day. And Arthur Blank knows that.
Yeah, one of the best things. So I do agree that I think that his personality just didn't mesh well in the media. But I think that if most people went and grabbed a beer with Arthur Smith, they would be like, "Oh, this guy rocks." Like I like hanging out with Arthur Smith. And I just think that when you're on a pedestal like the NFL, you're under a microscope, and especially as a fan base coming from his background, obviously it was going to be tough for him to kind of mesh with the fan base. But I want to talk about one thing that I absolutely loved. Arthur Smith just got beat down by Dennis Allen, probably just watched his job go by. Dennis Allen's team has the opportunity to kneel it down to end the game. And we do know now that Dennis Allen did not, he, ordered a kneel, and Jameis Winston went out there and called the play for Jamal Williams to get his first touchdown on the season. Arthur Smith comes out, has some choice words for Dennis Allen. I absolutely love it. I want to give my take real quick, and then I'll throw it to you for your take. I think that, it's the NFL. This is a big boy business, stop the other team from scoring, but it is a little scummy, schemy, whatever you want to say, to do it out of a victory formation, which I think Dennis Allen and everybody kind of agrees that if you wanted to go and get a touchdown for Jamal Williams, just do it, line up in the eye and just do it. Don't do the victory formation. But Arthur Smith had some choice words for Dennis Allen fighting on his way out. I did like that. What is your take on it?
Yeah, I agree with basically everything you said. When it comes to the NFL, especially the NFL, more so than college, it's a rivalry game. It's the NFL. You score points. If you don't want it to happen, stop them. But like you were saying, I think the fact that it was victory formation kind of rubbed Arthur Smith, obviously, and some other folks the wrong way, just because those rules are implemented for a reason. When it comes to victory formation, you're instructed as a defense to, back off, game's over, whatever. There is the argument of, players can get hurt like that. If someone is unprepared and you got Jamal Williams running full speed at you, something bad could have theoretically happened. But that's my take on it. I kind of just agree with you there, Alex, just that, stop them if you don't want it to happen, but at the same time, don't do it in victory formation. If you lined up in an I formation set or something, I don't think there would have been any fuss about it whatsoever. I think the big thing was the victory formation. And yeah, it was kind of good to see Arthur Smith put up a fight, even though, I think everyone watching that kind of understood that was probably going to be his last moment as head coach.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm sure we'll talk about this over the next few weeks. Obviously, the head coaching search is going to be the topic of conversation, but I want to hear your opinions, like early leans, guys that maybe you'd like to see, guys that you've heard of reports. Like where are you kind of leaning in just terms of personal opinion on where Arthur Blank goes next?
So it's interesting. I do think it was worth noting that Terry Fontenot is going to be an advisor for this, not
Hateful, by the way.
picking the decision.
Absolutely.
So, you can take that information with what you will, as being that Rich McKay and Arthur Blank will be the ones spearheading this movement. Usually it's the general manager who does that work. And this whole thing was kind of weird from the jump because obviously Terry Fontenot was hired after Arthur Smith. So Arthur Smith wasn't even technically Terry Fontenot's choice or coach in that matter. So it is a little weird there, admittedly, just because of that. Hopefully they get asked questions about that later today. We have crews going up to Flowery Branch as we speak. But as far as head coaches are concerned, The Athletic did report this morning that Bill Belichick is a name of interest for the Falcons. Now, Belichick, obviously, everyone knows about Belichick winning as head coach and could break that record very soon, held by, I believe, is it Don Shula, I believe, with the most wins. But I think it's starting to look more and more that maybe it was a testament to Tom Brady rather than Bill Belichick. So I know that Arthur Blank, being as old as he is, wants to win fast. And I'm sure he sees Bill Belichick as being that guy just because of his track record. But as far as other names to watch, I think Joe Brady could be an interesting name just because it was reported back in 21. There you go, LSU, that Terry Fontenot did like Joe Brady as a potential option as a head coach. So you've got him, obviously the hot head coaching candidates, Ben Johnson with the Detroit Lions, Bobby Slowick with Houston. Jim Harbaugh, I don't think will be an option for Atlanta. I think he's more interested in teams like the Chargers or maybe the Raiders, one of those two options. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, Todd Monken could perhaps be a long shot there, just with as much success that he's had early on with the Ravens, and obviously his familiarity with Georgia could sell tickets that way. So those would be my big guys. I mean, Eric Bieniemy, that name will always be thrown out. But yeah, as far as the early returns, if I had to guess right now, as you know, again, it's been hours since this has happened, but because of the interest that we've heard early in this process, I would not be surprised if Arthur tries to go after Bill Belichick.
I want to give a couple of takes, and those were just your feelings. I think that it's crazy that Arthur Blank wants to win so bad that he's willing to sacrifice the long-term health of the organization. Like, making the right decision in 2024 might not be the right decision for the team in 26, 27, 28. We're like getting a guy like Bill Belichick, who, to your point, all-time winningest head coach. A lot of people consider him the GOAT. But how much of that was really Tom Brady? Obviously, we know the pro personnel side of things. He's just god-awful in terms of a GM. And got by a lot. It seems like it was Tom Brady. With that being said, obviously he's the GOAT. He's a great head coach. If he came to Atlanta without, the need to make personnel decision-making power, I think it would be a fine decision. But it also feels like if Blank is closing off part of the hiring pool because he wants to win right now, I need somebody who's proven. That seems very short-sighted and not the best way to go about things. I get he's 81. It's his team. He can decide whatever he wants to do, but it feels like you're closing off part of the hiring pool by saying, I need to win right now no matter what. I don't care. And I know first-year head coaches have come in and win, but it feels like, to your point, everything's kind of pointing to Belichick. It's like Blank's kind of already made his mind up without even going through the hiring process. It seems like a very bad process.
Yeah, and to your point about Arthur Blank, this is just a personal theory, but I do think there is something to that with, going back to the Deshaun Watson scenario. I think that was a move that was more or less spearheaded by Arthur Blank compared to Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, which, maybe could be a reason why the team is in the predicament that it's in at the quarterback position. I think there's an argument that, the team expected, or Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot expected Matt Ryan to be there almost maybe up until this year and maybe get a quarterback to groom behind him. But because of that Deshaun Watson scenario, I think that was sped up. But at the end of the day, I think that was Arthur Blank. So he very much has a big say in what goes on personnel-wise when it comes to this organization, very much like Jerry Jones, very much like Robert Kraft with the Patriots. So, it is kind of hit or miss because you go back to the last few coaches. You can argue that Mike Smith and Dan Quinn were good hires. I think the argument was just maybe he held on to him a little too long at the end. So As far as them hiring head coaches, hasn't been bad, but you definitely maybe want to have your owner a little bit less involved with personnel decisions when you have a general manager like Terry Fontenot present.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone that follows this show religiously, they know how I feel about Arthur Blank and his personnel decisions and his coaching hires and his involved. Like, he's just way too hands-on. He needs to let the guys that he puts in place. He created this big corporation in Home Depot. I'm sure he didn't do that by having a hands-on approach with every segment of the entire company. But for some reason, with the Falcons, there is baby. I understand he can do whatever he wants, but it has cost the Falcons. If you even go back to the bad contracts of Julio Jones, Devontae Freeman, stuff like that, that's all on Arthur Blank. He didn't want those guys to leave. He still had 2016 so stuck in his head that it cost you this entire rebuild. We have to go to break. Miles, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we will see you back here next week.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks for having me on.